It was my second day at Hobart, Australia's southernmost capital city. It was about 8:30 in the morning, November 12, 2009, when we boarded our motorcoach for a full-day excursion to Port Arthur and the Tasman Peninsula.
Basically about history today. I'll be getting more into the history of Port Arthur and the first settlements in Tasmania.
The morning weather started with a bit of rain, but we hoped that it would improve as we got closer to Port Arthur.
Store where it was sorted.
We had a dedicated driver and a narrating guide. On this day, I had again joined Mike and Beth, a Canadian couple I've met on board the ship.
And on the right there, the row of trees.
This trip would be over an hour drive from Hobart. Leaving Hobart, we passed a few of the city landmarks before driving over the Tasman Bridge crossing the Derwent River.
Now we've got a little bit of time to just have a look at the bridge, the Tasman Bridge here on our right-hand side.
Tasman Bridge provides the main traffic route from the central business district on the western shore to the eastern shore.
You may have seen some small articles of hue and pine in souvenir shops in Hobart or around Tasmania. It's very expensive these days. On the banks of the Franklin.
It was a long drive, but our guide kept us awake with some interesting stories as we passed through the scenic countryside views.
Okay folks, we'll just stop here for a couple of minutes for those who need to have a restroom stop.
We stopped for a restroom break before we continued our journey. It was also our first photo ops since leaving Hobart.
This view here is quite spectacular, I think. We don't have a lot of time, so once you get the photographs and soak in the view, and we'd appreciate it if you'd hop back onto the bus fairly quickly. So we'll be here for just about 5 minutes only.
Next stop was the Tasman National Park lookout for the spectacular views of the Pirates Bay and Beach and coastal sceneries, among the best views in Australia.
So just coming up on the left-hand side, you'll see the replica of the dog with its barrel, just there. And that gives you an idea. This is the dog line, straight across this narrowest part here of the peninsula.
Finally, we arrived at Port Arthur's Visitor Centre. As we got off the motorcoach, we were handed a ferry ticket for the afternoon harbour cruise and a card that represented a convict and his specific offences and history of his incarceration at Port Arthur. Our scheduled tour guide was already there waiting for us for the half-hour introductory tour of this historic site.
So, good morning to everybody. Special voyages from Sun Princess. My name is Lindsay. Let me welcome you to Port Arthur Historic Site. It's a new concept in, I suppose, tourism today. We stop following convicts of the bottom.
Port Arthur is a former penal settlement occupying the tip of the Tasman Peninsula. It housed over 12,000 convicts from the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Australia between 1830 and 1877 in harsh conditions. A separate prison for boys as young as 9 was also built at Point Pure, about 3 kilometers across Opossum Bay from Port Arthur. About 3,500 boys were sent to Point Pure, and like adults, they were given hard work, such as stone cutting and building. The site has more than 30 buildings, ruins, and restored period homes set on 40 landscaped hectares.
Punishment prison, which means reoffending convicts were sent here for further punishment. It's named after the governor of the day who set it up, Colonel George Arthur.
There was a bit of walking on this tour. Some listened attentively while others walked away to take pictures of the surroundings. I switched between listening and taking pictures.
We might try to address those as we go through. When you think about it.
Then we were on our own to start exploring the grounds of Port Arthur.
Amongst the prison buildings service the tourism industry.
In a separate prison were special punishment cells. Convicts were locked up in total darkness and silence for between several hours and 30 days on bread and water, with 1 hour exercise daily. Prisoners wore hoods over their heads and were not allowed to talk or make any noise. Lunch was included in this excursion, and it consisted of sandwiches and coffee. Most of us just ate whatever was in it.
Maybe they wanted to figure out what it was like to eat, but the complex is the complex.
Then it was time to explore the ruins of the penitentiary. It opened as a flour mill in 1843 with convicts in chains driving the wheels to mill the flour. This was never successful, and it was converted into a prison, housing the convicts from 1857. When the penal colony was closed down in 1877, the penitentiary became one of Port Arthur's tourist attraction. However, it became neglected and a bushfire in 1897 destroyed all the timber in the building. The Smith O'Brien's cottage was named after its most famous occupant, a member of the British Parliament and leader of the Young Ireland movement. He was transferred to Port Arthur after having convicted for leading an unsuccessful rebellion in Kilkenny, Ireland. It was later used as officers' quarters and for a short time a military hospital. This is the Commandant's house, and it sits on high ground. It's where the senior administrators lived and directed the operation. The military area is next door. It also sits on high ground, so that the soldiers were able to defend themselves and look out for trouble. A 30-minute harbor cruise was also included in our excursion. Mike, Beth, and I got separated going through the ruins, but we all made it for our ferry embarkation.
Of course, the government wants to have a new dockyard, so the decision was to have it here at Port Arthur. The location, if you look at the port ahead of us, as we turn around you'll get a view. This is called Point Pure. Pure is Latin for boy or youth, it's spelled P-U-E-R. Basically comes.
It was very windy as we headed for Point Pure, the British Empire's first boys' prison. Some young boys were arrested and sent here for stealing toys or umbrellas. We didn't get off to tour this place, but we picked up a few visitors to take them to the Isle of the Dead. The Isle of the Dead became a burial place for Port Arthur. It was divided into free settler and convict burial grounds. Over the years, about 2,000 convicts and free persons were buried on the island. The harbor cruise ended. I wish there was more time to explore Port Arthur, but we had to go. Some other time maybe, if there is one. We boarded the motor coach to head back to Hobart, and I thought everybody felt good about this excursion. It was a very quiet journey back.